Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to Adrian's Digital Basement. On today's video, we're going to go back into the whole PC archaeology thing, where I'm digging through boxes of stuff that came from my friend's storage unit. I actually went around the house and I counted up how many of these boxes I have left, and I have 13 of them. And most of them, just like this one here, are pretty full of stuff. So each one is probably going to take an entire video. It was a New Year's resolution that I go through all these boxes and sort of sort through what's in these, decide which stuff I'm going to keep, which stuff I'm going to give away, and which stuff is broken. And that way I can declutter the house a little bit. Well, it's already April, and I haven't really done anything except for that one box on that video that was earlier this year. So in this video, like I said, I'm going to be going through this box of stuff here, and we'll see what we're going to find. So without further ado, let's get right to it. Before we switch to the top-down camera view, I just wanted to kind of give a look at what it looks like to look down into these boxes, to give you a little bit of a preview of what's in here. It seems that this one actually has a good amount of software in here, so this box might be relatively quick to go through. And if, well, I don't have my normal length of videos, I might grab another box and we'll go through that next. All right, here is our first card from just the top of the pile. So this is an 8-bit ISA card. This is for a PC XT or XT class machine, and it's an AST MegaPlus II. Now these were pretty popular cards back in the day. There were a bunch of different manufacturers making these types of cards. It was a RAM expansion board, specifically, well, usually EMS, so extended memory, which allowed RAM expansion on the XT in a way that was novel and allowed you to break the 1 megabyte barrier. The 8088 only has enough address lines for a total of 1 megabyte of memory. 640K was actual RAM, and then that top 384K was allocated to things like ROMs and add-in cards and stuff like that. The way that these cards implemented extended memory or EMS was they used, I think, 64 kilobyte window up in that upper address space, and then it would bank switch in these various chunks of memory. And I think a lot of programs like Microsoft Windows and Lotus 123 and whatnot supported this EMS memory, and with a little bit of extra programming work on their part would allow you to have that extended memory on your system. In addition, the MegaPlus II obviously adds more than just RAM. We have a clock here, which was not standard on those old XTs. There's a header here for a parallel port, which either would go on this part of the slot cover or potentially on a little extra separate one. There is an extra serial port header here. It says DTE and DCE, so data terminal equipment or data carrier equipment. Depending on where you plugged your cable into, it was the equivalent of using a null modem cable. And then a male DB25 on the back here indicates that this is another serial port. Now, several chips are not populated on this board, which implies that maybe not all of these ports are actually active. This is an 8250, which is almost certainly to drive this serial port. Well, it looks like there's an extra header here, which probably, along with these other ICs, would allow you to have this second serial port, and it's not populated. In addition, notice there's a header right here, and this is probably for additional RAM, which can go onto the board. But there's even another header right here, which is maybe some other board that would clip onto this and then add additional functionality without taking an extra slot on your XT. The RAM on this board, well, we have our favorite MT RAM here, 64K RAM chips, 200 nanoseconds. So 128K, 256K total of memory available on this to add to your old XT system. Luckily, AST cards, as I mentioned earlier, were very popular, which means the documentation's pretty much always been scanned, which is really important because these cards have a bunch of jumpers or dip switches on them typically, and without that, they're very difficult to use. So you really do need the documentation if you're looking for one of these RAM expansion cards. So just beware if you're looking online on eBay or whatnot to buy one, make sure it's a card that you can then Google and find the documentation for if it's not included. If it's a no-name card, like one of the clone manufacturers, and there's no documentation included, and you don't see any silkscreen markings on these for the switch settings, which is very typical, it usually doesn't have any, then you're gonna be out of luck, and I would recommend staying well clear of that card, unless you have a specific purpose to harvest RAM chips off of it. And these cards, especially the ones that are cheap and like no-name brands, if they're populated with memory, they can be a good source of RAM if you're gonna harvest it. In the AST manual though, here we can see that it's from 1983, so it's quite an early card. And looking at the feature set here, so we have a real-time clock, as we mentioned, RS-232 serial port. We have a second serial port optionally and a parallel printer port, along with a game adapter port to make the Mega 2 port the ultimate in expansion hardware. You have to remember that in the original PC, there were only 5 slots, and already a bunch of those are going to be taken up by your disk controller, potentially a hard drive controller, your video display controller, leaving you just 2 slots. So having a card like this that can kind of do everything all in one can actually be very helpful. And it looks like this board does support up to 512K of expansion memory. Now I'm wondering, because this board is so old, maybe this doesn't support that EMS, that extended memory I was talking about. That might have actually come later. Looks like you could use your additional memory as a RAM disk potentially, and also as a printer buffer. Ah yes, and looking at the memory addressing, it definitely does not support EMS, and the whole point of this board is actually to extend the motherboard memory. So if you had an original PC 5150 that only had 64K on the motherboard, then you could set this to start the RAM expansion at that 64K boundary and then add up to 512K for a total of 544K, which was the maximum allowable on that very first early version of the IBM PC 5150. But this 256K version that we have here would be good if your particular PC only had, say, 384K on the motherboard, or for instance, say it had 128K on the motherboard, another RAM expansion card, and then you would start this card at the 384K boundary to extend your memory all the way up to 64K. Now you might be asking, why would you add RAM to your system using a card like this and not right onto the motherboard? Well, a lot of old systems actually didn't support 640K on the motherboard. That came later, or you had to do some mods on your motherboard to allow that. A lot of older motherboards, for instance, could only go up to 512K, and if you wanted to get the full 640K, you had to use something like this to enhance and add that extra 128K to bring you up to that 640K barrier. And as far as I'm aware, the performance of this RAM was just as good as the performance of the RAM on the motherboard. There was no performance penalty for using the ISA bus connector to connect the additional RAM. Later, when systems were a lot faster, like say you had a 386, adding RAM through the ISA bus, even if it was a 16-bit ISA bus, would bring with it a big performance penalty, because ISA on those later systems was limited to about 8 megahertz, while your system might be running at 33 and have 0 wait states memory on the main board. But going through the ISA bus at 8 megahertz, you're going to have a whole bunch of wait states and you'll have a big performance penalty. But on machines like the 5170, the IBM 286 machine that was running the ISA bus at either 6 or 8 megahertz, adding RAM through the ISA bus on that was totally fine as well, just like it was on the original XT. Now I actually designed my own RAM expansion board for the IBM PC XT and all those early machines. And this board, which of course I've released as an open source project on GitHub, allows you to add up to 512K of RAM to your system. And similar to the AST card, you set the switches to have the start address start and pick up after the conventional memory on your motherboard leaves off. In addition, this allows you to add some upper memory as well, which you can then use to load DOS into to actually save some conventional memory. And I think that's something that these types of boards don't necessarily do. But as you can see, this board is very simple with a 512K RAM chip and just a few support logic chips and a dip switch block, and allows you to do a very similar thing to this, but of course without having all those individual RAM chips. Looking through the rest of the manual for RAM expansion on this AST MegaPlus, there's really nothing much more to it. It does not support EMS memory at all, so I was totally wrong on that. It's just for extending your conventional memory, and the manual is pretty comprehensive about how to configure it, how to add additional RAM, so that's pretty nice. As far as the game port goes, that is an extra card that actually plugs onto this expansion header that's right here along the edge connector. And that gives you the game port functionality and gives you another pin header here to put to a little slot bracket that has that extra game port. So I'm not going to do any testing on this MegaPlus II. The reason why is it's difficult to test this. You need to have a system that does not have 640K. And all of my PC XT motherboards that I have floating around the basement for testing all have a full 640K on them, which means that this isn't really useful unless you want to disable the RAM completely and just get the clock calendar and the serial ports. And if you're looking for a RAM expansion card for your system, you could buy something like this if it was something that was very inexpensive. But honestly, I would just use my RAM expansion card or one of the other ones that are available out there, because this is going to be a lot easier to use, specifically because the switch settings are just written on here, so you can configure it relatively easily. And this is something you can very inexpensively build yourself, as opposed to this card here, which if there's a problem with the RAM, you're going to have to go find RAM chips, and there's all these other support components here that may or may not be working properly. But this is a great period correct card if you're trying to build yourself up a PC 5150 or 5160 and you want to have a multifunction card that does everything, and you can get one of these relatively cheaply. If I'm not mistaken, I actually have a card exactly like this or very similar to this, an AST card in my PC 5150, expanding that to 544K and then adding the additional clock and serial ports and stuff like that. When I bought my 5150 on Craigslist from the original owner here in Portland, they had this card in there, which I think they had in it since it was new. Well, they bought it in 1981 and they very soon after upgraded it with a card like this to bring the memory up to full capacity along with these additional features. So these cards are definitely a period correct upgrade for your old 5150 or 5160. Yeah, pretty cool. AST MegaPlus II. All right, the next thing from the top of the pile, you might have noticed this when I had the camera facing at the box. This is pretty hilarious. What we're looking at here, if we zoom up on the label here, is an alphanumeric keyboard. It's a special purchase, and you can see it comes from Radio Shack. Archer brand is written there. That's their in-house brand. Cat number 2771017, and unfortunately the price sticker was on there and has fallen off. Well, if you're used to vintage computers, you can look at this and know right away that this is a keyboard from a TI-99 4A. And what a sad state of affairs it was when TI was selling the TI-99 and got into a price war with Commodore and basically could not compete. And they ended up having to give up on the home computer business, and all of the excess parts that they had for their TI machines got sold off to various companies. And I know you could find all sorts of components like the expansion units and things like that in the back of magazines, but I don't think I realized that things like keyboards had been sold off to Radio Shack to be sold to hobbyists inside Radio Shack stores on pegboards like this. And if we look at the back, there it is, the alphanumeric keyboard. Now it does say it's originally from the TI-99 computer. I think it's actually the 4A, since this is the beige version, which came from the later machines. A high-quality QWERTY keyboard with standard typewriter staggered format, electronically arranged in an XY matrix. All keys are single pull, single throw, momentary contact switches except for alpha lock, which is an alternate action switch. Electrical connections may be made by the connector amp, and there it is, or directly to the PC board. And look, they even give you the matrix right there. Custom package in the USA for Radio Shack, a division of Tandy Corporation. And taking a look at the keyboard here, we can see that it's the Mitsumi keyboard. So certain keyboards on the TIs were mechanical, and this one is not. This is very similar to the ones in the Commodore 64. I'm hesitant to open this just because it's kind of an interesting thing. But on the other hand, having a spare TI-99 keyboard, I don't know. I think I have a bunch of spares of these TI parts anyways, so I don't really need to open this. And this is really a curiosity. I am curious to look up this cat number, see if we can find a catalog that has this number so we can see how much this keyboard cost. Now, what we can see on eBay here is that people are selling them as well. And look at this one. This appears to be one of the black versions. So I guess you could just, it was random what you were going to get. And like I said, it was a sad state of affairs that all of the TI parts just got sold off for surplus, which I guess is kind of cool. I mean, maybe these made their way into KIC computers and things like that. Ooh, and this is kind of amusing. So in that Google search, I found that Radio Shack also sold Commodore 16 keyboards as cat number 2771027. This keyboard here is 1017. This keyboard is an Archer 65 position multiplex output keyboard, but we recognized it as the Commodore 16 keyboard. Purchased quite a few of them and still have a few available in the original packaging. Now I'm trying to find an actual catalog that has this listed, and I found this one here, which came up in a Google search, but unfortunately doing the search here in the PDF, it must not be OCR'd. Oh, it is OCR'd. Well, this catalog's from 1986, and I feel that that's probably a bit late for this keyboard to be sold at a Radio Shack, but I'll leave it up to my viewers to do the searching to see if you can find out exactly how much this was sold for and in what years, because I'm pretty curious about that. Also, let me know in the comment section what you think I should do with this thing. Should I take it out of the bag? I mean, it is a usable keyboard for the TI, but on the other hand, isn't it kind of cool that it's in this packaging? And that actually kind of coincides with the next item here, which is another TI-99 part. It's the power supply that was inside the TI-99. And this one does have the original price sticker on it. You can see right here, it was $4.95 for a switch mode power supply. Now this does have this strange input jack that TI used for their little AC wall wart, but it's just 2 wires, and I guess you could just replace that with a more conventional connector if you were going to use this in one of your projects. And this takes 18 volts AC input, but then gives you these 3 voltages output, which would have been very handy if that's what you needed, and it was a full switch mode power supply. Now looking at the back of this, does it say that it came from the TI-99? It does not. but this was definitely the TI-99 power supply as well. Radio Shack had the 18-volt AC power supply ready to go. Oh, check out the cat number. It's 1016, which is just one digit off from this one. Interesting. Now, I found these particular power supplies on the TIs to be very reliable. I've never really had to do any kind of repairs on these. Let me know in the comment section if you're a TI-99 repair person and you've had to fix some of these power supplies. These were the later versions because I kind of recall the earlier versions had 4 pins in there. You could see the extra pins that are not used. I guess it needed 2 different AC inputs to give you all the voltages on the output side, and this later version just took that single AC 18-volt input. When this was installed in the TI machine, it was in this orientation, and there's the power switch that turns the power supply off and on, and there was a little piece of plastic that went down onto there, and then you could slide it from the outside of the machine. And then the power cable here, the input that is, went to the back of the case, and then that is the DC output that went to the motherboard. So it's kind of cool in a way that this stuff was repurposed by Radio Shack, but then also sad. So yeah, if you ever used any of these parts in any projects you ever worked on, I'd love to hear about that in the comment section. Okay, going in the box, it looks like there's another one of these power supplies as well. It has the same price, $4.95. So yeah, there are 2 of these. Okay, so in the box is a whole bunch of PC cards. I'm gonna try to go through all of these first, and then we'll get to stuff that looks like software and some other well, they're PC related, but not cards at least. So if you're sick of looking at these cards, you can skip over this whole section. So we have a random assortment of things here. Let's just start with what was on the top here. This is a Conexant composite video capture card. And typically, and from my understanding, this is just 4 composite inputs, and it would make its way to this Conexant card, which then would send the captured video over the PCI bus. These did not have any kind of fancy hardware encoding. It just digitized the composite video input and sent that raw data over the PCI bus, which of course was fast enough, being PCI 32 bits, to be able to transfer that amount of video data, now standard definition of course, over the bus uncompressed. I have pretty fond memories of these cards back in the days. I'd say around 1999 and 2000, I worked at a place and we built these video encoder systems and used these exact cards. And we would take a live video stream here and then encode it for transmitting over the internet. And I remember the bandwidths we had a 28K bandwidth, we had a 56K bandwidth, and we had a 300 kilobits per second. The 300 kilobits was the fancy one that was designed for people that had DSL, but the other ones were for modems. And of course you got like a postage stamp sized video reel player, or maybe it was Windows Movie Player or whatever, like Windows Media Center. I don't think that was out yet in that time, but whatever the Microsoft version of the video codec was. And yeah, it would transmit over a modem video and audio. It was really bad quality, but we used these cards. So it's kind of cool to have one of these. Now, you really do need to use this with like Windows 2000 or Windows XP. I don't know if there's drivers for this in Linux and later operating systems. We can see here that the Conexant chip is from 2003, 29th week, and it's a Conexant Fusion 878A. So yeah, if this thing works on Linux, it might be kind of fun to play around with this someday. As I said, it just takes the NTSC or PAL video and then converts it right into digital without any kind of processing, minimal amount of processing. We're all pretty used to video capture now, having hardware encoding to MPEG-2 or MPEG-4 or whatnot. And yeah, back in the day, there was just not that kind of horsepower available in inexpensive silicon like this. And these Conexant chips were very common and very prolific and pretty inexpensive as well. Like, I think this video capture card wasn't too costly. If you see stuff in this video that you'd really love me to do more testing on, definitely put a comment down below as well so I can maybe try to get back to that at some point in the future. The next card is a Future Domain ISA SCSI card, and these are pretty cool. This has a floppy drive connector on it, an external SCSI connector on the back. It's a high density type, and we do have a BIOS, so that means that this thing should support booting directly off of SCSI disks. We can see a date code right there of 1993. This is the floppy drive controller specifically for the 1987 date code. But this IC right here also has a 1993 date, 30th week, and this is a TMC 1680. And I really do like these ISA SCSI cards. I have an Adaptec or two over there in my little pile of cards I use for testing, but the Future Domain stuff, I don't have as much experience with it as I do with Adaptec. And of course, you could use this with something like the Blue SCSI, although this doesn't have the right connector on the back, so I can't easily connect this, not without an adapter. But the internal version of the Blue SCSI that connects to the ribbon cable here, well, that would absolutely work. All right, next up we have a video card, and it's a very strange one. What's happening here? Okay, well, it's a regular PCI card, and I'm assuming this would have been a normal card that had a normal slot connector on the, or slot bracket on the back, but then someone either bent the pins and purposefully installed the VGA connector standing 90 degrees off the board. You can see the rework that was done there, a little unusual. Removal of this sticker will void your warranty from Discount Software Outlet. What? From 1998. And this card itself appears to be a real S3 card. So that's their old logo right there. And the BIOS here says S3 Virge from 1997. Virge DX on board, fancy. Why exactly was this modified in this strange way? It's cool to see this has expansion memory, but this is funky. Maybe this was for use inside like a luggable, like a Dolce or something, where the video card was completely internal and this went to some internal monitor, something like that. If you have any thoughts, let me know. Well, we have another strange card here with a bunch of cables wrapped around it. Is this a single board computer? I think it must be. So a Pentium processor without a heatsink. Looks like something was stuck on there at some point. We have onboard RAM of some type, along with a RAM slot, and we can see by the notches there and there that this is SD RAM. Looks like we have a Pentium 166. We have cache memory. Oh, look at this, I just noticed. Apple computer? People are probably screaming at their screen. Is this some kind of PC compatibility card for the Mac? ATI video card chipset with RAM for the ATI card. An Opti chipset, this is for the Pentium itself. We have some SMD caps that do not appear to have leaked, so that's nice. And obviously these cables here are for sound expansion, like it would go to the CD-ROM drive or maybe the motherboard sound. And you can see here, it says Rev sound out and standard sound out. And then this is the video connection, and I recall this has some kind of weird cable that goes from this into a splitter cable that goes onto the motherboard video and also to your monitor, and I think there's some switching that goes on, and this little cap here covers just a standard PC game port. So what is this card for? This is obviously for a Mac, and I guess it's for the later PowerPC Macs to bring PC compatibility. It's kind of rude. The CPU was literally soldered down. Oh, look at the back here. I didn't even look at this. This is soldered in. Why isn't this in a socket? That's pretty rude. I suppose it would have raised the footprint because this does need a cooler of some kind. But really, was it necessary to have this soldered in just so you could never upgrade it? Because there were all sorts of faster processors you could have gotten for this. All right, so on the back of this thing, we have more of the Opti chipset. We have more of the system memory that's built into this thing. And then we have this LSI part here, which certainly bridges the PCI bus into the rest of this card. So it allows the Macintosh or the host computer to interface to this computer, like keyboard and mouse and stuff would come through this connector. Meanwhile, this is a self-contained computer. Oh, it's a Vibra 16, so a Sound Blaster 16 there as well. Look at the bodges all over this though. Kind of interesting. Looks a little Mickey Mouse, although that is glued down at least. So theoretically, unless Apple was doing something really weird on their PCI bus, you could plug this into a regular PC and have an additional computer, a second computer, inside your system. Now I happen to have a couple of these cables floating around, and I think these are, look at those pins, they're a bit bent up. This, I think, is like the splitter cable that would plug into your motherboard. Those pins are bent as well. And then you would plug your Macintosh monitor into this. And I think somehow, maybe this card does the switching. You would enable this card and it would switch between the Mac video coming through this connector. And then it would either route the VGA signal from this to your monitor, or it would just do the Mac stuff. I'm not sure this is the right cable though, because it does also have this joystick port, while this appears to have the joystick port built in. So maybe, well, there were several of these cards over the years, like 486s and things, and I think that this might be for the older cards, like the 486s, and not for this PCI card. I'm pretty positive I have viewers watching who know a lot more about this stuff than I do, and you can let me know which is the appropriate cable, and if that cable that I had there works, and even which system this works in. I don't have any PowerPC Macs in the house. Well, I have one actually. It's a G4 Cube, and it's the only one I keep around simply if I need to run something from that era. But PowerPC Macs are really not my thing. I like the 68,000 stuff. And once it gets to PowerPC, it's completely uninteresting to me. I'm happy to leave that stuff to other people for, well, them to love. But for me, it's not really my wheelhouse. So that's why I don't really know much about this era of cards here. So yes, almost certainly that is what this is for. None of the 68,000 Macs, as far as I'm aware, had PCI slots on them. So really the only way you could use this is with a PowerPC Mac. If you know more about this, definitely put a comment down below. All right, I really need to pick up the pace here. As usual, I just sort of talk too much. Yeah, it takes too long. Okay, so we have another ISA card here. We have an ISA sound card. TurleBeach, right. What kind of card could this possibly be? A quick search reveals that this is a TurleBeach Monterey card. And here is the Monterey. So if you're not familiar, TurleBeach made pretty high-end sound cards for the PC, and they were really well known for having incredible high-quality audio output. So they use really good DACs, really good noise filtering. And cards like this, the Monterey, allowed you to actually add RAM to it. You can see a SIP that's plugged in the top, and I could see the header right here along the top edge. And this card, when new, was $399 or $349, I guess, a little bit later. And this seems to be a Tahiti card with the Rio daughter board attached, bundled as an all-in-one purchase. And this card, along with I think some of their other ones, featured the Hurricane architecture. It's touted on the box. That's an electrical design that supposedly circumvents reliance on the motherboard's DMA, instead handling more on the card itself to relieve the burden on the main CPU, and in so vastly improving performance. This lends itself to audio processing of larger or longer pieces rather than short samples that games would use. So these cards are not suited well to gaming, and that's the thing about these. They're not like good Sound Blasters or Gravis ultrasounds, but they're great for multi-channel audio when you're working in a professional space. Right, so 16-bit audio up to 44 kilohertz and 32 voice wavefront synthesizer, along with numerous audio effects. At 44 16-bit resolution, the Monterey has better sound quality than the AW32 and produces the most realistic audio quality imaginable. I just pulled off the little plastic clips so I could remove the daughter board here. Look at what's happening underneath. So right here, this gives us a lot of insight into the magic that allows this card to be so cool. It's a DSP 56000. I'm pretty sure this is the same chip that was used on all sorts of other systems like the Atari ST 030 Falcon and the Next systems, the 68,000 base systems, that allowed them to do all sorts of fancy audio processing. And then looking here at the Wavefront card that was attached, this is the Wavetable daughter board, you'll notice we have a Motorola 68,000 running at 10 megahertz on this particular board. Now, I don't know for sure if ICS owned TurleBeach at this point, but they might have. And you can see from 1994, this stuff here was enabling all of the wavetable synthesis. Now, what I don't know is this card compatible with plugging into a regular Sound Blaster card? Maybe, maybe not. Not totally sure. The wavetable header looks very similar, but this card obviously has some sound fonts built in. And a sound font, if you're not familiar, it's a ROM-based or maybe a RAM-based sound library that allows synthesis to have standard instruments. So a piano, strings, organ, things like that. This one has ROM, you can see high and low for a 16-bit, because of course that's what this is, 16-bit processor. But it also has this SIP slot here that allowed you to plug an 8-bit SIP in there, which is just a SIM that has little pins on there, presumably to expand the memory. So it is pretty curious to know that for $400 here in 1994, you were getting a 68,000 base computer along with a sound card that has this extremely fancy and cool Motorola DSP on it. This DSP also requires some RAM, so we have some DRAM right there. And I'm assuming the rest of this is just going to be DACs and ADCs and stuff like that, and then plus bus interface things for the ISA bus. But this thing is going to allow all the magic to happen on this card, which I think is why it was so cool in a professional setting. But on the other hand, things like this made it not really useful for things like DOS. There's no DOS compatibility whatsoever with this card. I'm pretty sure you have to use this with Windows at the minimum. Windows 3.1 would have been the contemporary OS at the time. And of course, it goes without saying that by the time Windows 95 came out, and the drivers for this probably came out that allow you to use this in Windows, then any Windows game would be able to use this card and work properly. And there were probably MIDI interface stuff, so any game that had music could play through this wavetable synthesis card that was attached to the TurleBeach card. If you have fond memories about these TurleBeach cards, I'd love to hear more. Because this is not DOS-based, I can't do any kind of testing on this, not without Windows and a bunch of drivers and stuff. And that's probably a video in and of itself. And I am no sound card expert outside of like the standard stuff. So yeah, it's probably outside of my wheelhouse a little bit. All right, next up we have a 16-bit ISA Orchid card. Now, Orchid makes video cards. We are obviously looking at a sound card here. I don't know, I don't know anything about this card. I didn't know Orchid made sound cards. And it's funny that there's all these pretty loose components here. These are capacitors. In fact, that one right there is no longer attached to the board. That one still is. Wow, these are very fragile. If someone bodged those on, they should have at least put some hot glue on there to try to keep those from floating around. Now, Orchid was pretty popular in the video card space, like with CGA and EGA cards. Problem is they were not popular in this world. And Orchid made a whole series of really interesting cards like EGA cards with acceleration built in, like 286s built in and things like that. And there's really a lack of all documentation and drivers for those. So I wouldn't be surprised if this strange sound card is in a similar boat, where we may not be able to find any kind of useful drivers or information on this, but we still need to take a look. A quick search resulted in this article here. So the Soundwave is a general MIDI compatible sound card introduced in '93. It does have a built-in MPU 401 interface, making it fully compatible with any game supporting general MIDI. A few games also supported the card directly. How interesting. The sound sample chips included one with two 512K chips storing 2 megs of sound samples, and a newer version with two 1 meg chips for 4 megs of sound samples. The wavetable synthesis sound quality varied greatly depending which version of the ROMs were installed. It is also possible to upgrade the older cards to the newer chips. Looks like the card has some rudimentary Sound Blaster capability as well, along with AdLib, OPL2 emulation, which doesn't sound super great. Also MT32 support, but doesn't support the LA synthesis or the programming method the MT32 did, so that a lot of games who used customized sounds would not sound correct. And we have a couple photos of the boards, and this does not have these giant bodgy capacitors on here. Looks like there's a couple surface mount ones. Oh, you know what? Those surface mount ones are still on this board. So I don't even know what's happening on this thing. This website has scans of the box as well. And definitely, if you look at the screenshots here, this is all Windows 3.1. So this is definitely a Windows targeted sound card. And unfortunately, the thing about sound cards, just like this one or the TurleBeach one we looked at before, getting these working it's kind of a nightmare, because you have to have a fully installed version of Windows 3.1 and then find the right version of the drivers and get that all installed. And this is all pre-plug and play, so you have to fiddle with IRQs and base IOs and all that kind of stuff. And it can be a little bit of a nightmare. And for me personally, when we got to the 90s, sound cards were starting to get kind of boring, because everything just, well, they worked basically the same inside Windows. When you had games running in Windows, you didn't need to have direct support for sound cards. It just used the drivers and just sort of worked. And then all the really variance you had was the wavetable synthesis, the quality of the wavetable synthesis, whether it was better or worse or whatever, depended on which card and one of the capacitors just fell off the board. That is hilarious. I shouldn't shake this card as much as I just did. So yeah, sound cards in the 90s, kind of boring. It's kind of the 80s stuff that is more interesting to me, because that is where software was directly supporting the cards and they were trying to put out really cool and neat features. But these cards, what were you differentiating yourselves between one card to another? TurleBeach's claim to fame was higher quality audio and the professional workspace. But for instance, this Soundwave 32 from Orchid, I mean, what was the deal with this? Why would you buy this over a Sound Blaster card? Because if you got a Sound Blaster card, the AW32 would have all similar capabilities to this, but the Sound Blaster could have RAM for RAM-based instruments, so better sounding. And then, of course, 100% backwards compatibility with everything Sound Blaster and AdLib, and not fake emulation like this card has. So maybe the thing they had going for it was cheaper price. If you have particular memories of this Orchid Wave 32 or no reasons why it's a good card, yeah. Let me know, please. And we have made it to the very last card that was in this box. And I don't have any clue what we're looking at here. What is this? The only thing I can think of what's going on here is that this is from some kind of like a chassis-based system, like a phone system or something. And very clearly we have a Pentium processor here. Well, there's a socket for a normal Pentium processor. Oh. No, that's not a Pentium processor. I don't even know what that is. We're gonna have to take that off. So this thing here is obviously the most interesting thing about whatever's going on with this card. So on the sticker here, someone wrote, "Maybe dead, type 4, something 66. And then what is this? Was this like a chipset from Intel or something? Oh, and it says IBM on it, right. So the date code here, 1993, but I really am curious what system this thing went into, and I'm sure people watching are going to be able to tell me. IBM chip as well? Are these cache memory chips of some kind? Maybe. They also have the -66 on it. And on the back side of the board, we have tons of TTL logic along with the back side of that custom IBM chip, that large Intel chip, and then this socket here, which seems to be the processor. IBM FRU 92F0120. Well, looking at the FRU brought me to this PS2 page, the Model 95. And this is where I know nothing about PS2 machines, and it's not really something I'm particularly interested in either. They are so, well, they're interesting. I find it interesting, but it's like a rabbit hole I don't want to go down because everything is so custom and so weird, like this card itself, that, you know, if you have a bad one of these trying to fix this, it's basically impossible. There's no schematics, there's just no service information. You just have to do part swapping, and that is not what I really like to do. It says here that the Model 95 is unique in that it uses a CPU complex card, which obviously is what this is, that can be swapped out with some complexes sporting completely different architectures, ranging from a 386, 46 Pentium in socket 4 and 5, but there are no socket 7 complexes. MX can be achieved by using an overdrive in a socket 5, and precautions must be taken when using an overdrive Pentium in a P90 complex. It can stress the VRM, and upgrading the heat sinks or VRM itself will be required. And taking a look at the photos of the inside of the machine, I guess that's it. That's the CPU card right there, and it has some kind of a processor on it with a little heatsink. How exactly does this giant tower fit into this slot right there? I don't see how. Now, it would be pretty sweet if they made these with completely different architectures, like PowerPC or whatever. You stick it in there and suddenly you have a PowerPC machine. Oh wow, check that fan out, the tangential fan. Here are the FRUs. So 92F0120 is what we have in front of us, and it's a Pentium 66. So this has the FDiv. So this is an so that's why I don't recognize the socket. It's got the pin spacing from the earlier socket 4, is that what it is? Socket 4? And that was only the Pentium 60 and 66. And it has the FDiv bug. Now, someone didn't want to use that old Pentium 66 with the bug, and they upgraded it with this whatever upgrade module is here. So as I said, the rest of this card, not super interesting to me, but this third-party CPU upgrade here, yeah, that's pretty cool. So let's try to get this thing out of here. Should just lift up, 0 insertion force. Aha, yes, it is. Socket 4, just like I thought. You know, I don't think I have any socket 4 machines at all. Just socket 5 and socket 7 stuff. Now looking at this CPU upgrade here, we have a socket with a PCB, some logic that is necessary for, I guess, voltage regulation and whatnot for the presumably socket 5 CPU that's on here. The sticker on the fan gives away who makes this. It's Power Leap. And I think we'll have to just do a little bit of Googling to see if we can figure out which Power Leap socket 4 to socket 5 upgrades existed. You can see the spacing on the pins there of whatever CPU is underneath here. That is absolutely a socket 5 or socket 7 CPU. I'm also kind of baffled at however they constructed this thing, because somehow they had to solder on this socket and that socket, and the pins, well, you can't do that by hand, that's for sure. It must have been some kind of heat-based wave soldering or something that did this. Now, it looks like this thing had more clips on it originally holding it to the CPU than just this one. There was another one there that is broken, and that one is missing altogether. And on this side, we have 2 right here and here. So let's see if I can get this off. Oh, that did come off pretty easily, actually. And we can look at what CPU is underneath here. All right, there it is. What do we have underneath? Whoa, we have an MMX CPU? Fancy, very fancy. Fortunately, we can't tell the speed of this because it's written on the bottom side, and I don't really feel like trying to extricate the CPU from this socket here. But that is quite the fancy upgrade for your old PS2 with the socket 4 CPU to get all the way up to an MMX CPU. I think these came in 166, 200, and 233 variants. And it would have offered a very significant performance improvement for this system over the 66 megahertz chip or 60 megahertz chip. Oh, actually, no, we know it was 66 based on the FRU. Yeah, very cool. Now, the fact that it says maybe bad means that maybe this is the bad part. Who knows? A quick search brought me to the manual for the Power Leap upgrade. And this is definitely the one that we have here. So the Power Leap PL54C MMX upgrade allows your Pentium 60 or 66 socket 4 to take advantage of the latest MMX CPU technology.
The CPU board employs patent-pending technology to adapt existing systems to the voltage and pinout requirements of the new generation of processors. Now, there are some jumpers that are for setting your voltage and multiplier, and it looks like no jumpers were installed on this thing. That means this is a Pentium MMX 233. And here's a picture of the Power Leap before the CPU gets installed. The Power Leap upgrade also supports AMD K6 up to 300 megahertz, along with the IDT C6.
I think I'm going to keep these separate because I'm never going to have a PS2 Model 95, but I definitely might end up with a Socket 4 machine. And then this would be a pretty cool upgrade to do a video on. So that is the very oddball CPU complex from an IBM PS2 Model 95 with a very interesting Power Leap CPU upgrade. Continuing on with what's in the box, we have a Teac floppy drive, and I'm going to say this is a 1.2 megabyte drive. Yes, it's a GFR. So just a run-of-the-mill 1.2 meg drive. I worked on a ton of these on a second channel video, so if you're curious about that, I'll try to remember to put a link down in the description below. Oh, it's got the white PCB on the bottom. Some of these Teac drives are dual speed, which is kind of cool. That means they can run at 300 RPM or 360. And that means if you're running at 300 RPM, it allows you to use double-sided media, but actually store 720K on them because it has 80 tracks versus 40. So yeah, kind of cool. Obviously very dusty. We'll give that a quick test later. Next up is a CD caddy. And if you don't know what these are, well, CD-ROM drives, the early versions required these caddies for your CD-ROM games. So you squeeze these tabs right here and then you flip this up, put your CD in there. And I guess the idea was, well, it would protect your CD so you could kind of have them stacked up and sitting around on your bench. And when you needed to use one, you just shove the whole caddy with the CD installed into your drive. Of course, it was kind of a pain if you only had one of these, because then you had to constantly open this up to put in new discs. Now, I think that CD caddy goes with this drive right here, and this is a CD-ROM drive by NEC, the Multispin 3XI. And I think the I means this is probably a SCSI drive, and sure enough it is. Even though it just says I/O bus, that 50-pin connector belies that this is a SCSI drive. And then we have some jumpers there for SCSI ID and I guess other things as well, because you would only need 3 jumpers for the normal amount of SCSI IDs. Audio output, grounding pin, and then a regular Molex for power. Now the actual model number on here, now the CD-ROM drive from November 1993 is CDR 500. And if we take a look at the front of this thing, yep, this is definitely a caddy-based drive. So you would flip this down, which is just kind of an interesting mechanism. Open/eject, I guess that actually does the ejecting. There must be a little switch in there. And I think this is a little door right there, and it is. And you slide that caddy right inside to stick your disc in. So we actually have playback controls for the CD and that audio output right here, a headphone jack. And I mean, this is pretty cool in a way, because say you just had your computer sitting there and you wanted to listen to a music CD, you just pop it in, put your headphones in, and you have full control over it. And this would probably show you the track number and maybe the time even. And we'll just have to give this thing a test and see if it still works. It wasn't long after these like 3X drives came out, so that's 3 times normal CD-ROM speed. So normal CD-ROMs are at most 150K per second. So right there, 450K per second was the fastest you could get out of this particular drive. I'd say only the earliest CD-ROM drives, I mean, look at the date there, 1993. That was relatively early. Only the earliest drive used these caddies. After that, they pretty much moved over to using the trays that, you know, everyone is familiar with. And it was just a lot easier from a consumer perspective to not have to worry about these stupid things. And honestly, if you had a bunch of CDs sitting around your desk, just put them back in the jewel case. You didn't need to stick them in these things. Now, along with drives and things, we have another drive here, and it's pretty rough shape. This is probably completely cleanable, so not a big deal. But I have to kind of guess that this drive looks like a 360K drive, and I like that because that's a little bit less common. Panasonic JU475. And actually the JU475, at least this -4 variant, it says here that it's a 1.2 megabyte drive. So a little bit less boring. I suppose one cool thing about this drive though is it is sort of a light cream color versus the darker beige that most other drives are. Now the digits that come after the 475, notice there's a -2 and a -5. This thing here is actually the 3C29 according to the sticker. I think those are just sub variants that have like different color LEDs, different color faceplates and things like that. But I think the 475 denotes that it's a 1.2 meg drive, which means that this is just the same as that big stack of other drives that I had. So just to help me remember, I'm just gonna write 1.2 on here. And actually, I just noticed something. Look at this barcode here, AT&T. So I suppose this was a 1.2 meg drive used in, well, certain later AT&T machines. Continuing on the theme of media and discs, we have a box of floppies here. And let me just try to get this shrink wrap off of here since it was already open. It looks like we do not have blank discs. We actually have some software. The Shareware Showcase. Yeah, Form Generator 4.1A. This came from the business series, and then we have a game series here, Striker Helicopter Fighter Simulation. Now, how's the condition of these discs look? Okay, actually. Beware sticking unknown floppy disks into drives though. That can result in your drive getting clogged up with mold and stuff like that. So it's really always a good idea to slide these out and then take a look at the media itself. So see in the reflection there? If I spin this around, if there was any mold on there, you'd see splotches and other issues. Be prepared with 5 1/4 inch discs that have a way to clean the heads on your drive because essentially it's very common for these to dirty up your drive and make them not work. Next up, we have Miramar Flight. I guess this is completely on the bandwagon of Top Gun. So yeah, that's where Top Gun was, down in San Diego in California. Next up from Mr. Disc, thank you for your purchase of our Shareware library. We are dedicated to serving you and look forward to future business. The staff at Mr. Disc. And for a complete catalog, here's their phone number. I love how the VGA jigsaw puzzle needs VGA. Does that not give it away? It's kind of hilarious. We have Battlefleet, disc number 759, High Tech Arcade, number 703, Kid Games, number 603, Computer Solitaire, 714, Treasure Chest GMS, is that like gems and they didn't have enough room for that? That's number 702. Oh, we do have some blanks. All right, that's nice. My strategy for blank discs like this is to put these all in my PC over here, and I have a 360K drive in there, and I use Format Q to just basically bulk format floppy disks. You stick it in, it does a format, it makes a beep sound if it's good. If it's bad, I throw the disk away. And yeah, that's it. So I just make sure that these are all working first. Oh, someone put a sticker on one of them, so perhaps that's got something on it. I just make sure the discs are good, and if they're good, I have a box of discs that say formatted good, and I put them in there. These are all 360K discs, and that way when I need to go use one for an old system, I can grab it from the disc box that I know has already been tested, and it's much more likely to work than having these sit around, you know, untested, and then I go to use them at some point in the future, and it doesn't format or has read errors and things like that. I just like to eliminate those discs, and I generally have really good luck with that strategy. Down in the basement here, it's always about 21 degrees Celsius or like 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and humidity is like 45% all year round. And that means it's like kind of optimum storage for these types of discs. So when I format them, test them, put them away, even years later, they generally still work perfectly, and that's pretty awesome. So I'll have to leave it up to you, my viewers watching this video, to let me know if any of these discs are, well, long lost titles that I need to try to archive and preserve, upload them to archive.org. I may end up actually just doing that anyways, just archiving all of these, just in case some of this stuff is unknown. But it would probably be a fun video to just try out some of these old games as well. I'm assuming there's no dates on any of this stuff, but these discs look like 360K discs. So I'm assuming late 80s for these games. Might be kind of fun just to sit down with the test machine here and video capture and play some of these games. So yeah, let me know in the comment section what you think about that strategy. And again, if you see stuff here that seems totally long lost, definitely let me know so I can get it archived. All right, and we have the very last piece of hardware that was in the box. Everything else that's in there, it looks like it's software. And it's this, a Cyrix 386 to 486 clock doubled upgrade microprocessor. So it upgrades a 386DX 16, 20, and 25 megahertz to presumably some type of a 486. And I'm assuming it's going to be a 46 DLC. So it's not a regular Intel 46 or what would look like a standard 46 motherboard processor. This is going to be a 46 processor that just plugs into the 386 motherboard directly. And looking at the side here, we have a Cyrix 46DRX 25/50, which I think is the clock doubled nature of this. So if you have a 25 megahertz 386, it will clock double to 50, and then you're also getting some 46 functionality as well. But if your system is only 60 megahertz, it's only going to clock double to 32 unless you can switch jumpers to speed that up. Higher performance without buying the new computer. Single chip upgrade solution, easy to install. Cyrix microprocessor technology, clock double performance, 1K cache with cache coherency. That's cool. So 386 does not have any cache built in to the chip itself. It has to be on the motherboard. This has level 1 cache in the chip. That is going to be quite a performance improvement just having that alone. On the back of the box, we have this little chart here, and we have this top one here. So good up to 25 megahertz, which gives you up to 50 megahertz with this clock doubled chip. But there was another version that could go up to 66, and a version for the 386SX, which I actually made a main channel video about a while ago. And that video did really well for me. It was like one of the earlier videos. And indeed, a 386SX chip is something that's surface mounted right onto the motherboard. And this was like a upgrade processor that just plugged on top of the surface mount chip and gave me clock doubled 46 performance. Now, still have the limitations of the regular 386SX, which is 16-bit data bus, stuff like that, but it was a big improvement in speed, and it was so cool that it was simply just a clip-on chip. It was so easy to install. This is going to require removal of the stock chip that's on the motherboard and then installation of this new processor. So this is not going to be as easy as that particular upgrade. Now, it does tell you that right here, so there it is. So it gave you a tool to remove the original chip, place processor into socket, press it in. But for the SX, you just simply push it down onto the chip. And it comes with a lifetime warranty. All right, so can I call Cyrix for some support here? Compatibility tested for Windows, DOS, NT, Novell, and OS2. Yes. So we haven't even looked inside of here to see if the actual upgrade processor is even in this box. This might just be an empty box, or maybe with a few manuals and stuff like that in here. All right, well, let's see there. Oh, wait, there's 2 chips in here, or we don't even know what's going on in here. Inside of this, we have this 46 chip from TI, and what the heck is going on here? I don't even know what this interposer is doing here at all. Cyrix did include a new sticker for the outside of your case, and we have the installation manual and a piece of software here that presumably allows you to turn the cache off and on, run some diagnostics. This appears to be a high density disk. Usually you can tell because it's missing the little ring there. Version 2.01 of this software. So I'll definitely be imaging this software just in case it's not floating around. I always upload everything I archive to archive.org. So if I ever talk about that, I think there's a link in all my video descriptions that takes you to my archive.org page where I've uploaded scans of books and whatever else. So looking in the manual, I'm going to say that this is not the original chip that goes in here. This looks like it's a DLC/E. So this is definitely a 40 megahertz part. I don't think that matches what we have here. And sure enough, this is how the chip looks from Cyrix. I've seen these before, and it has gold writing on it. Oh, it also looks like you should have 2 of these little chip removal tools, and only one of them was included. I guess the idea is you pinch together, and then that lifts the old chip out of there. We need to look up what's going on with this TI part here. This may not be clock doubled. This might just simply be a 40 megahertz 386 drop-in. And I think Cyrix made the TI 46 chips, like it's actually their core that's inside of here. Vogon's post talks about the Cyrix made TX 46 DLC/E. That's the part we have right here. And it looks like you can enable some kind of cache, the L1 cache internally with an extra command, but it may not be enabled by default. Some further searching reveals that this absolutely is not a clock double chip. It just runs at 40 megahertz, which means you have to have a motherboard that supports 40 megahertz. I happen to have a 386 motherboard sitting over there on the bench, but I think it's a 25 megahertz board, and it cannot go faster than that. So that would be the limit of this chip. You would still have improvements if you enable the cache and all that stuff, and the internal clock doubled variant made by Cyrix would have been a better performance upgrade for that particular motherboard. If anyone has any thoughts about why this interposer is installed on this chip, definitely let me know as well. I have a feeling maybe it just protects the pins and it doesn't do anything else, although I couldn't really say. I'd never seen such a thing. Now, even though we're missing the clock doubled CPU, I'll still try out this one in the motherboard. It will just run at the slower speed just to see if this thing works, because if it's a bad chip, then, well, I need to know that. And now all we have to look at is some software. And I think everything that's left in the box, just kind of glancing down, appears to be Atari 8-bit software. And some of it might be cartridges, like we have QIX here. And indeed, we have an Atari 8-bit game cartridge here, QIX computer game, CXL 4027. And inside the box is the original manual for the game. And save $5 on select home computer programs. There is the graphics. That is an actual screenshot from the game. The idea is this thing here sort of flies around the screen, and you need to fill up the screen with as much of this solid color as you can. And this right here is the player, and you basically draw these boxes and you try to connect between 2 points. So if you go from there to there, all of this area would be filled in, and then that would box in the little moving line. But if the moving line touches you or your line before it's filled in, then you will perish. I noticed that in here there was one more piece of paper, and it's the 90-day limited warranty. Unfortunately, this box has seen better days. It got crushed at some point, although the contents are in decent shape. Next up, we have the basic compiler. Now, I am concerned that this stuff looks pretty damp, and I'm wondering if the discs are, yeah, the disc is warped a little bit. It doesn't look like it's damaged though. That's great. So we have a basic compiler with a serial number 1983 from Datasoft. I'm not 100% sure if this is for the Atari. Galactic Chase, Spectrum Computers. This game is from 1981. It was in this package here. Obviously, this is unrelated to this. Looks like there's something on the disc there. It looks like there's also a concentric ring of some kind. Oh yeah, see all that? This disc is probably no good. This is like a pattern that's made by the internal felt that's in here because it was exposed to a lot of damp and moisture and whatnot over the years. Oh, and I just noticed the actual manual for Galactic Chase is in this bag, so it seemed like both things were in here together. Okay, this is for the Atari 400 and 800 machines. Only 16K of RAM is required. Yeah, 1981. So remember that this came out even before the Commodore 64 was out. Commodore 64 came out in 1982, and the VIC-20 was out in 81. If I recall, I might be mixing those years up a little bit, but the Atari 8-bit machine came out even before those machines. So for the year it came out, it's a very, very capable machine. Luckily on the Atari 8-bit machines, it had cartridges, and those are generally going to work like the other one we looked at, the QIX. And then this stuff has all been archived, so it's not like some kind of rare game that's long lost. So there's our basic compiler, and this is also for the 400 and 800 computers. And this looks like it came out in 1983. Now, interesting to me is that I love the idea of basic compiler. You'd write your basic program and use a piece of software like this to dramatically speed up the performance of your handwritten basic program. These types of things existed for the Commodore 64 as well, like the C128. I don't know if they existed for other systems. I'm assuming they did. Obviously, we have one for the 400 and 800, but did they exist on the Apple II? I don't recall ever running into one on the Apple II. So it says here, this is the first compiler for the Atari computer. The basic compiler is useful for those who want the speed of a machine language program with the ease of basic programming. You have the advantage of writing your program in BASIC, compiling into the machine language to run at lightning speed. Knowledge of assembly or machine language is not required. It's a 4-pass compiler, generates 6502 machine code. During pass 1, the compiler translates your basic program to assembler files. Passes 2, 3, and 4 utilize an assembler to assemble all the files generated in pass 1 into machine language. All assembler files on the final compiled program are saved on disk. Looks like at the minimum, you do need 48K of RAM, which was the maximum amount of memory supported, at least in the stock configuration on these two machines. The 800 could easily run 48K. I think the 400 needed some mods to get there. You use the Atari basic cartridge, and then of course a floppy drive, the 810 or a PERCOM disk drive, one or more, and you need a diskette and a couple of files, and looks like we have some instructions on how to do it for single drive systems or dual drive systems, which surely would have been much faster. Now, because I was an Apple II kid at the time of, well, when this came out, I really don't know too much about basic compiler. So I'd love to hear people's experience with the basic compiler on the Atari line of computers. Was there any commercial software that used this basic compiler to make games and stuff that could run at, acceptable speed so that the programmers did not need to use assembly language? Definitely kind of curious about that. Does anyone know if the compiler here came in this bag? Is that how it was shipped, or did this come in a proper box with a binder and stuff? And obviously these two things are unrelated. In the box, looks like we have a bunch more Atari 8-bit software. I think it's all on floppy disk. Now, I have 3 floppy drives for the Atari 8-bit line of computers, but all of them are untested. And I want to make a test and try video on the second channel where I at least see if those drives are working and maybe clean them and lubricate them and fix them if they're broken. So what that means, though, is there's no way for me to even test any of this software right now except for QIX, which is a cartridge one. I can definitely test that. So let's just go through the rest of these, and I think we'll just kind of be taking a look at what I have. So here we actually have Flight Simulator, and this is the Sublogic version for the Apple II, which I think was the first flight simulator on any 8-bit machine. If this is the real price from this thing, it was $33.50, and this would have been at some point in the 80s. Now, I don't remember my history on this exactly, but I think this was purchased by Microsoft. Oh, right, we have both versions of it. So the original flight simulator from 1980, and then the second version here, FS1, Flight Simulator 1, Flight Simulator 2. And didn't Microsoft buy this piece of software? And that is where all the flight simulator we have today came from this? I think that's something to do with the history there. Flight Simulator 1 for the Apple II, written in assembly language, 16K required. And oh, that is so awesome. Look at that cool television set. And yes, it's just like a wireframe, like the original version here. But that was an expensive Apple II. Dual disk drives and that 70s tacular cassette drive there. So this came with British Ace 3D aerial battle game. Ooh. Now this is probably the cover page for the whole package here. 32K disc. Does that mean it needs 32K of RAM? I guess I'm a little confused that it says 16K there, but either way, 32K disc, FS1. There's a close-up of those graphics. We will test this out. Now this stuff is all available online, of course, but it's so rudimentary. But you know what? In 1980, that was pretty spectacular. Think about the fact that the Commodore PET and the TRS-80s and a whole bunch of those early computers were completely text-based only. So to get 3D type graphics like this in 1980 from your home computer was pretty awesome. Of course, the Atari 8-bit line was out already and had, well, let's be honest, frankly, far superior graphics to the Apple II, which is 1977 graphics. And what was the Atari 8-bit line of computers? 1979, I think. So it is pretty curious, to be honest, that Flight Simulator came out for the Apple II first and not for the Atari. But either way, I think it would have been pretty cool to see graphics like this when, you might have been using a TRS-80 with just text mode and you see this 3D graphics and be kind of blown away by it. Okay, I see what's happening here. So it was the disc version that required 32K because it looks like the 32K or 48K system adds new features over the tape version. If you reach the ground with a vertical velocity of more than 250 feet per minute, you have crashed. You will be dramatically told this has happened. The simulator automatically resets after a crash. In the tape version, it was hard to determine if you were really shot down. In this version, there will be no doubt. If you're shot down, count on violent spins and crashes. Also note that the enemy has no more strength than the tape version enemy. All right, besides the flight simulator, we have another copy of Galactic Chase, and this seems to be for the Atari again. Let's see if there's a floppy disk in here. Inside of here does appear to be the disc, and the disc is in pretty rough shape. I'm not so sure about a disc like this working. Not when it's bent like this. You can just cut this and take the inner sleeve out and put it in another one. But, oh yeah, that's really hard to turn because the disc is so warped. But we're not done yet. There's still a bunch more stuff here. We have a $32.95 game here, Attack at EPGYG4, what? Okay, a space adventure from Bram Inc. System requirements, 24K of RAM on the Atari 800 or 400, joystick controller, and a floppy drive. Bram Inc. was up in Seattle, Washington, so just north of me here in Portland, and it comes with a free poster and some kind of rudimentary artwork there. There's the game disc right there. Let's see how this disc has fared over time. It's not too bent, and it looks okay. It might work. And we have a little bit of a story here, and this cursive writing is annoyingly difficult to read. It was 2056 that the world was startled by the first communication with intelligent being from another planet. The humanoid beings knew Terran languages quite well. The communication was from a race called the Ologians or Ologians, who said their native planet was what we call Epsilon Cygnus 4, and they had disastrous news. And yeah, they're probably coming to invade the planet. Oh no! So power up the computer, insert the disk. Oh, Epsilon Cygnus 4, I guess that's what that stands for. And we have a little bit of instructions on how to play the game, and almost certainly that's the free poster that it talked about. And we have a limited warranty and a little bit of copy on the back. Let's see about this poster here. If the person who did the cover art also designed the poster, yes, indeed, it appears to be the same. I can't really get it all in shot there, but it's a glossy poster of the cover art. I would love to know, was there anyone who had this game and put this on their wall of their bedroom. You know, when you're a kid, you're kind of starved for things like this. So sure, I think if someone gave this to me and I had an Atari 8-bit machine back then and this game, I probably would have put the poster up. But is this game any good? I mean, I'm really curious. These are games that are so early on. This says 1982 on the disc here. So 1982 game. I had my Commodore VIC-20 in 1982 and I was playing cassette-based games. They were just not that good at all. So this might have been pretty awesome compared to what I was playing on those little games that would fit into 3.5K of RAM that's on the VIC-20. So yeah, pretty cool. Next up we have Atari Basic, and looks like someone paid 46 bucks or $47 for this. I think the Atari 400 did not come with Basic, and you had to buy that extra. The 800s did. The Atari experts, definitely, please let me know. Says it contains the Basic cartridge. Yes, there it is. So it goes into the middle slot. Well, the only slot on your 400. But yep, indeed, does look like we just have Basic right here. Why did someone buy this? Except unless you had a Atari 400, right? Inside the box is nothing except this limited warranty card, and that's it. I guess they kind of expected you to know how to use this. Maybe the manual for the computer itself talked about it anyways, so you didn't need any additional documentation. Next up, we have Apple Panic from Creative Software. This has a few different prices on it, but it seems to have gone down. Is that really $3.97, or was it $29.89? Oh, it came from Fred Meyer. That's a supermarket chain up here in the Pacific Northwest. The stores, even though they're primarily supermarkets, also have mixed goods and stuff like that. So you can buy clothing, furniture, car parts, paint, and they all have electronic sections. Even to this day, they sell modern games or modern consoles. But it's kind of cool to know that back in the day, they sold actual 8-bit home computers and stuff as well. They don't sell any computers anymore, I don't think. They used to sell some amount of laptops, but I honestly haven't looked lately, but I don't think they have any laptops anymore because, you know, why would you go to the supermarket to buy a laptop? But then again, why would you go to the supermarket to buy a television as well? So I'm not quite sure how much they're selling of any of that stuff, but it's kind of cool to see that these came from there. And I have had discs come through the basement that are Fred Meyer branded floppy disks. They have their own brand of discs that they sold. But this game, yep, Fred Meyer, Apple Panic. It's a cartridge game for the VIC-20. No additional memory required. Yep, of course not, because it's a cartridge and does require a joystick. And of course, it's being a VIC-20 game, they're not going to show actual artwork because, well, it would look like junk anyways. So there it is. On the back, nothing much to talk about here. 1982, turn off your VIC, insert the game, turn it on. To pause during play, press the stop key. We have a cartridge with no label. Oh, okay, it has fallen off. Curious, very curious. So many of the cartridges for the VIC-20 were published by Commodore and had Commodore branding on them. Even though the game maybe wasn't from Commodore, they published it. This definitely looks like a non-Commodore cartridge though. And unfortunately, that label is not inside the box here. So it's just gone. Next up, we have another VIC-20 piece of software here, Rescue at Rigel, or Rigel. Cassette for the VIC-20, 16K RAM expansion required. Look at that risque cover art though. They were trying to entice you to bug your parents to buy this game. Or maybe this was for adults, I don't know. You've got 60 minutes in real time to free 10 prisoners from a maze-like alien moon base. Computer-generated map. Apple uses high-resolution color and sound. Ooh, real time, different every time you play, for ages 10 through adults, intermediate complexity, 20 to 60 minutes of playtime, and for one player. Rescue at Rigel during play on the Apple computer. Yep, high-res graphics. It's not gonna look like that on the VIC-20, I don't think. Seems it came out in 1980 and was made by Automated Simulations in Mountain View, California, published by Epix. Inside the box, we have the manual with some more cool artwork there. I kind of like it. We have a summary of play card, also pretty cool. We have some awesome artwork in here. I like it, I really like it. Got a little robot there with some arms. We have to remember back in the day, when you had games with graphics like this, you had to use your imagination. A lot of reading, and you got the backstory from the manual, right? There wasn't enough space in the game to give you the backstory. So this is where it came from. You read this and you would get the game and you would absolutely read this and love it. And then, you know, you'd play your game. And of course, if it had replayability like this one claims it does, that's all the better. Movement commands, combat commands, and special commands. Have you serviced your heads lately? Yep, talking about how to align and service the heads on your data set, your Commodore data set. And then, what's the hardest thing in the world? Tearing yourself away from an Epix game. So the Epix game catalog. Alien Garden, Planter Mania. What is this, a spinning plates game? King Arthur's Heir? Crypt of the Undead. Escape from Vulcan's Isle. The Temple of Apshai. I'm sorry I'm saying that wrong. And Upper Reaches of Apshai and Curse of Ra. Hellfire Warrior. Star Warrior. Jabbertalky and Armor Assault. Oil Barons and Ricochet. Here's the price list, right? Or does it even have the price? No, it does not. Just shows compatibility. All right, so we have games compatible with the Apple II, and looks like AppleSoft ROM is required. TRS-80, well, it doesn't really specify which TRS-80. Looks like we have cassette level 2 and TRS-DOS. So this is gonna be like TRS-80 Model 1 and Model 3 type machines, not the color computer. Atari 8-bit line of computers, both on cassette and disc versions. Apple II always came on disc version, and we have IBM PC games as well, 64K required. Not on very many systems though, just 5 games available there. A whole lot on the Apple II, a good amount for the TRS-80s. Atari 8-bit got shortchanged a little bit. Looks like we have 3 on ROM cartridges, and then the VIC-20 really got shafted the most. 1 game on cartridge here, and then we have 4 games released on tape. And then the PET had a mere 1 game. And there's the game for the VIC-20, and it's all in really nice shape. So for all we know, that game may work fine. All right, I really need to pick up the pace here. Roklan software here. We have Gorf by Midway. What is this? Ah, it's a disc for the Atari 8-bit line of computers. Only requires 24K of RAM. Unlike a bunch of these, the condition of the box is pretty good. I feel kind of ripped off here. This would have been the cassette. So, okay, yeah, there's a disc in there. So that's the placeholder for the cassette, which is not installed in here. Let's see if we can get it in here. I don't even know if anyone's ever opened this before. We do have the floppy disk there. Gorf by Midway by Roklan, of course. This is the port for the Atari 8-bit line of machines. The disc is a little bit warped because it's been squished in the box for who knows how long. We have a screenshot. Hopefully that's on the Atari 8-bit line of machines itself. And it talks very minimally about the game instructions. I guess there's not a whole lot to this particular game. And then it talks about Astro Battles, which looks like a Space Invaders clone, Laser Attack, Space Warp, and Flagship. We got some business software from them as well, from Roklan. And next up, I have Wizard of War by Roklan, also for the 800 and 400. And this one's not even open. And then we also have another copy of Gorf. And is this one been opened? No, I don't think this one's been opened either. And then we have a piece of software here for the VIC-20 called Screen Print. It looks like it's a cassette and a cartridge and a printer. Look at this, very royal looking, from Softsmith software. Now you can make all your images lasting ones with Screen Print. It enables you to print a copy of any picture you create on the VIC-20 high resolution screen. It also offers a wide variety of features, including a process called windowing, which lets you print only the portion of the screen you want. Magnification and inverse images are also available. Screen Print is easy to use and can be added to your basic programs with 3 lines of code. And inside the package, we have the manual, which has the dirty window there, which was showing through. And there's the tape, and what there is not is the cartridge, because it definitely seemed to indicate that you needed a cartridge. Let's see if that's the case. Okay, so it is just tape-based software, but it uses the Super Expander 3K cartridge, which didn't come with this. That just added 3 extra K of RAM, which would probably make space for the program that you're loading off tape. I'd say that on all the various computer platforms, there were pieces of software like this or hardware solutions to enable this kind of thing. On the Apple II, it was a big deal to have a card that plugged into your computer, and you pushed a button that was on a little wire that would come out of the back of the computer, and it would freeze whatever was going on and then print your screen. And that type of thing was pretty cool. Imagine you got a high score in a game and you wanted to save your evidence that you got that high score. Well, with one of those hardware-based solutions like on the Apple II, you push a button and you would just get the printout. And I'm sure something like that existed for the Commodore 64. Not so sure about on the VIC-20. And I'm sure the Atari 8-bit line of computers had stuff as well like that. When I was a kid growing up, I didn't have any of those solutions, but I remember seeing the ads for them in magazines and thinking, oh, that's kind of cool. But the reality is now, like, is there any kind of need for that stuff? Not really. It's more just a curiosity that that was a big deal for quite a while in time. And the need for that has sort of faded away because it's just in this day and age, we don't even print anymore, right? And then the last thing that was in here was Flight Simulator 2 by Sublogic. So this, I think, is just the packaging for that other disc that we had found before. And maybe the floppy's in here as well. So there's the manual, and you can see there's like a huge improvement. in the graphics on Flight Simulator 2 versus that original version. You actually had shaded graphics and circles for gauges and things like that. It was pretty advanced. So this is the Pilot's Handbook and Airplane Flight Manual. Now, the funny thing is, I've played this game. I remember playing it when I was a kid. Now, I did not have this manual, so I somehow figured out how to play it, but I did not play it a whole lot. And I remember it feeling really, really sluggish. There's only so much you can do on a 1 megahertz 6502 base computer. There's the floppy disk, so we actually have 2 copies of that. That's kind of cool. I should get that other one and put it with this one. And then there's a second manual that's not back from the printer. And of course, if you want this, to get this, you fill out your registration card and then you'll get that manual. Well, that's interesting. It looks like someone never sent that in. And as well in here, we have this quick reference guide, not a photocopy like we had in the other one. And it appears that we have a photocopy of it. And then it looks like this is definitely Los Angeles. I mean, I can tell by the names here, but just the land of the terrain. There's Catalina Island down here. So this is the chart, which has like waypoints and stuff like that. I guess it's one of the things in the game that you reference to fly through and do landings and stuff at the airport here. Oh, and look at this. This is the Pacific Northwest. So this is Seattle, SeaTac, and Olympia. Portland is just south here. And this is Victoria right over here in British Columbia. And yeah, that's pretty sweet. And it looks like we also have the New York-Boston area chart. That was included as well, along with the Chicago area chart. So I guess these are some of the cities that are in the game and are fully supported. Only ever having had the pirated version of this game when I was a kid, I never got to play the game properly, knowing what keys to push on the keyboard to do stuff, but also not having any of these charts available to me. And it wasn't like this stuff was online and couldn't look it up very easily. This was one of the problems back in the day when you had more complex games like this. It really was much better just to buy the game and get all the included documentation and, for instance, this thick manual with it, than trying to download this and get a copy from a friend or whatever. All right, well, I think that's going to be it for this video. The box down here is totally empty, so we've gone through everything that was in here. Now, this video, I can already tell has been, well, it's really long by the time I edit this together, so there's no way I have time for doing any testing. I would really like to try out at least some of this software, and I definitely want to try out some of the hardware, which is mostly sitting over there, just to see which of those things actually works. I know lots of people say they like really long videos, but I think YouTube doesn't appreciate it if I make like a 3-hour-long video testing all this stuff. So for now, this is just gonna have to be like we look through this box, and in part 2, then I'll start to test things out. So that's gonna be it for this video. If you enjoyed me going through this box of random stuff and sort of talking about stuff, then, you know, thumbs up. If you hated this, then let me know down below in the comment section, and you can give me a thumbs down or whatever you need to do. Hit subscribe if you haven't done that already. Huge thanks to my patrons. Their names are scrolling beside the screen to make it possible that I do this full time. So I am very grateful to them, and it's just amazing the support I get, and I still can't believe that it happens. So thank you very much to everyone. And if you want to become a supporter, you can do so at the link in the description below. Now, if there's anything you see in this video you want me to test specifically, definitely put a comment down below. If I see a whole bunch of comments on like certain things, then I'll have to go and make sure I test those things in part 2. In addition, remember that if you see stuff like some games and stuff that seem to be like totally long lost or whatever, which I highly doubt, I'm sure this stuff is all super duper common, I can always scan manuals or try to make images of these discs and stuff like that and put them on archive.org. And I guess that's really it. So stay healthy, stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.